Hello, my name's Evie Gallagher and welcome to the first episode of Outside Inside Number 9. In today's episode, we're going to be delving into the topic of folk horror, so its history and then working towards how it's influenced and how it's used within Inside Number 9. So this is a brand new podcast and each episode is going to be about a different subject matter which Inside Number 9 incorporates within the show. So today's episode is actually going to be a part 1, as we're going to be exploring the history of folk horror, how it ties into Number 9, and then part 2 is going to be talking about the folk horror episode from the latest series, Mr. King, and the other uses of folk horror within Number 9. So I hope that you're going to enjoy these episodes. Folk horror is a huge passion of mine, and I'm very excited to share my passion with you guys. Maybe you'll learn something you didn't know before, maybe you'll be interested in something you weren't interested in prior. Let's all learn together and let's all talk about Inside Number 9. So, the term folk horror was first used by Mark Gatiss, who, funny enough, was in a sketch group called The League of Gentlemen, with both Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton, the creators of Inside Number 9. So he coined this term in a documentary about horror, which he was making for the BBC. So it was the first time that this genre of films had been named, which makes it quite interesting.
From the late 60s, a new generation of British directors avoided the Gothic clichés by stepping even further away from the modern world. Amongst these are a loose collection of films which we might call folk horror. They shared a common obsession with the British landscape, its folklore and superstitions. The Wicker Man may have become the cult film, and Witchfinder General may have grabbed most of the critical plaudits, but there's another film which I think deserves much wider appreciation. What makes it so special? Well, let's just say there aren't many films set in the reign of William and Mary in which the devil rebuilds his body by harvesting the skin of children.
I just love that it is Mark Gatiss naming it and coining the term because, funny enough, folk horror really surrounds the work of Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton. They love every element of it and they love incorporating it within their work. So an example of this is, if you're a fan of The League of Gentlemen, you'll be aware of the term doing a Wicker Man. So it stems back from the second episode of the first series of The League of Gentlemen, and the writers were so heavily influenced by The Wicker Man that they wanted to homage the show. And here's a clip of it.
28 years old, brown hair, name of Martin Lee. I found the wallet outside the shop. Has he been in today?
No, I don't know anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, officer, the shop is local.
Well, perhaps your husband saw something. Is he on the premises?
He's up the stairs, cleansing the precious things of the shop. He can't walk, you see, and he's blind.
Hello, Tots. What's going on? What's all this shouting? We'll have no trouble here.
So what they did was they had a police officer come in and they did a Wicker Man. So it was just so interesting that all these years later, they are still working with and exploring folk horror.
We'd always wanted to do a Wicker Man. It's our favourite movie, really, isn't it? I mean, we did it in The League of Gentlemen.
Over and over, yeah, we do. And have done.
So suddenly it was like, that's the element that's missing from this whole stupid fluorine chain of people gluing themselves together. Ultimately, it's going to be a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that, once we had those elements, I think it really came to life, didn't it?
And it completely fits itself in very nicely into the sort of folk horrorness, because then you read up on John Barleycorn and the sacrifice of him to the, like Wicker Man, to the corn and the rebirth, and it all fitted into place, didn't it?
So Reece Shearsmith has never really left the folk horror community, so he still collaborates quite heavily with Ben Wheatley. His latest collaboration was In the Earth, which was released last year, And so he's still working and honing the British genre, which is folk horror. So it's very interesting to me that he's still working within and working towards making a number 9, which is a folk horror. So how I would describe folk horror is that it's a community-based horror genre. So the villain and the threat within the piece is the community around you. Usually it's set in isolated areas, especially British folk horror is set in very isolated areas. And so a protagonist will come into the piece and with the aim, it's always with the aim to help the community. The community thrives with them and then fights against them, and then they learn the true colours of the community. If somebody's never seen a folk horror, I always say, have you seen Hot Fuzz? And they always say, yeah, of course I've seen Hot Fuzz. And I say, you know the end of Hot Fuzz? When there's the cult and the one of us. And everyone's like, yeah, I love that bit. I'm like, that's a folk horror.
Oh, come, Sergeant. You should be ashamed. Calling yourself a community that cares.
Oh, but we do care, Nicholas.
It's all about the greater good.
The greater good. How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
That's the perfect example of a folk horror. It's just in a comedy context. And people get it, and people understand it, and people sort of know what folk horror is about just from that. So, the subject of folk horror with Inside Number 9 is it's always there, it's always got an underlying, it's always underlyingly about, but they've never fully delved into it. Especially with their very, very horror-heavy episodes, they've never fully committed to it. There's always little hints and tricks, but never fully. So the first time that they've done that was with Mr. King. So Mr. King was in the 7th series of Inside Number 9, which was released in 2022. And what they did was, and it was incredible, is they committed and they did a full folk horror episode, a fully fledged episode. And when I tell you that I was so excited when I saw a new character going into a new environment where they didn't want to leave, oh my God, I was shivering in my timbers.
You know, we have the lovely, hopefully for those film literate people among you will know that the previous teacher, Mr. Hardy, is Robin Hardy, of course, who directed The Wicker Man. It's a nice little nod to him.
Headmaster, it's Alan Curtis.
Oh, hello, Aaron. What can I do for you?
I need to talk to you urgently about several things. Firstly, about Mr. King. This school has no record of him ever having worked here.
What's that? Sorry, it's a very bad lie. Something about Mr. King?
The class teacher last year was a Mr. Hardy. Completely different person. I don't know what this King has been doing here, being given access to children, but I think there's been abuse going on. It's been covered up, and I think you...
It was incredible. It was, what a way to pay a clear homage to your genre and to your favourite genre that make such an incredible work of art like Mr. King was. It was... So, on Twitter, I saw that Reece Shearsmith posted that he had actually designed the mask at the end. So the fact that they had such a clear goal of what they wanted to do with their folk horror episode is astounding. It is wonderful. I think that Mr. King is flat out my favourite ever Inside Number 9. And that's coming from someone who's a huge fan of the show. I absolutely just, Mr. King, I've seen it, I think, about 5 times now. I'm trying not to overdo it because I loved it so much. And it was such a skillfully made treat of an episode. It was really something to bite into. And whenever anyone says, what's Inside Number 9 like to me, I show them that episode. And I watch their reaction in the last act, in the last 5 minutes. And it's astounding. People love it. People were confused by it and go, oh, that was bizarre, and I'm like, that's Inside Number 9, but that's also the best piece of folk horror that I have ever seen. I think it demonstrates every single aspect of it perfectly, and I think it's just astounding. It's just astounding. But also, because, you know, Reese and Steve can't get all of the credit for it, obviously the wonderful director Louise Hopper just helped so much just to bring it to life.
And so what did you take away from first reading Mr. King as an idea of how to do it, how to do a number 9, be given a number 9 and think, how am I going to do this then?
I mean, what I love about the scripts, and this particularly, it's a treasure trove of red herrings.
Yeah.
And it's about how you have that tightrope and that balance between what are the lovely clues that the audience will be looking for? What's this one about? What's the twist? What's the twist? And how you have to pull back from that. So it's that push and pull, which I really enjoy, is how do you tease out those moments? When do you allow it to open and when do you pull back? And keep that mystery, that propulsion going. So the audience is thinking all the time, I think I've got it, but I'm not sure. What is it? What is it? So that, as a director, is the fun, is the giving the information and the tease of that information.
But also the child actors were incredible. They really, really captured that suspense and that knowing. Oh, just honestly, I could speak about it for a whole podcast, but I won't do that to you. So here's a clip of Mr. King. I think it's important to watch the episode if you're even slightly keen. But here's a little taster. Before things start to go awry.
Orada, doszło now.
Orada, Mr. Edwards.
Ma atron with Mr. Curtis at my Mindy Gurthy on Saesneg. I was telling him you're going to be taking all your lessons in English, which is a very important skill for those adventurers amongst you who might be thinking about leaving the village in the future. Mr. Curtis used to teach at a school in London, so I'm sure he'll have all sorts of exciting stories to tell us. They pay £2 for a coffee, don't they?
And the rest.
Oh, dearie me, imagine that. Now, as you all know, your previous teacher, Mr. King, had to leave us after a wonderful year. I know. But he has sent us this postcard from his travels, and I wondered if one of you would like to read it to the class. Kerry.
So that's the end of today's episode. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you've learned a little something or found an interest in something to do with folk horror, or that you just had a nice time listening to this. Thank you very much. Join me for another episode next week to dive into part 2.